Well, good morning, and welcome to Tuesday of the Fatima Last Chance for World Peace Conference. As you know, I'm John Vennari, and I'll be your first speaker for today. If you look on your program, it says that my talk is going to be called, Does God Change His Mind? But my talk was bumped from yesterday, so today's talk is what yesterday's talk should have been, and that is the Consecration of Portugal and the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I wonder if any of you have heard the story of when there was a flood at the Vatican. There was this massive flood, and the water was rising, and it rose all the way up to the steps of St. Peter's, and that's high water. And the Pope was standing on the top step, and the water was coming up, and a speedboat come along and said to the Pope, "Hop in, Holy Father, we'll save you." He says, no, don't worry about me. You save the other people. God will take care of me. You just go and save the others. The waters kept rising. Now the water goes up to where his balcony is. And another speedboat comes along and says, "Come on, Holy Father, jump in, we'll save you." No, don't worry about me. The good Lord will take care of me. You go out and save the other people. Finally, the water is all the way up to the top of the dome of St. Peter's. Over top the dome, and the Pope's standing on top of the dome, and a helicopter comes down. "Holy Father, grab the rope. We'll save." No, the good Lord will take care of me. You fly off and save others. And the water comes up more, and the Pope drowns. So the Pope appears before the Lord and says, "Dear Lord, I am baffled. Why? I was relying on you. Why didn't you save me? Why did you let the flood tides take me over?" And the Lord said, "Well, we did send 2 boats and a helicopter." So I tell that because even more so, when we think of the consecration of Russia given to us as a means out of this devastation, and like the 2 boats and the helicopter, it seems that the clear saving grace that our Lord's giving is being ignored. Do you have an announcement, Father? Yes, go ahead. Just yes.
Oh, just a quick announcement. You still have a few days left to avail yourself of fulfilling the conditions for the first Saturdays, and I haven't heard enough confessions. I don't know if people got the message. So I'm set up a confessional back there, not the first 2 doors, but the 3rd door, and I'll be back there hearing confessions. Now, just remember, I was asking somebody last night, well, we have a few days left for Saturdays. Did you go to confessions? He goes, well, I didn't have any mortal sins. Well, it isn't one of those things where you only go if you have mortal sins. You come in and you tell the little things, maybe. Just, you do an examination of conscience and you confess your venial sins in that case. You lack charity, or you kicked the cat or something like that. But it's just you have to go to confession. Mortal sins are not to avail yourself of the first Saturdays. So please, I'll just put myself back there. I'll be behind the yellow curtain, and during the conference or whatever, anybody who wants to come out and go to confession, I'll be there as long as necessary. I can hear confessions in pretty much any language. The languages I understand are French and English and Spanish and Italian, some German. But if you confess in another language, then the longer you talk, the bigger the penance is.
Thank you, Father. He had told me that he was getting ready to set up, but that's why we had him come in. Now, okay, so as I said, the title is the Consecration of Portugal and the Triumph of the Immaculate Heart. And we've been talking about the need to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and we argue, of course, that this consecration has not been done. Chris Ferrara gave a magnificent presentation on that point yesterday. I'm going to be coming at it today from a different angle, because one of the most striking historical events that demonstrates that the proper consecration of Russia was not fulfilled is to contrast the 1984 consecration of the world with the Portuguese bishop's consecration of Portugal in 1931. The Patriarch of Lisbon at the time, the eminent Cardinal Catejeda, said that what took place in Portugal in the 1930s and 40s is a sample, a preview of what Our Lady has prepared for the whole world when Russia is consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. These men, when you hear what I'm going to tell you here, the entire episcopacy of Portugal believed firmly in not only the message of Fatima, but also the efficacy of the consecration of Russia and consecrating the nation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Their faith is edifying. This dramatic consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary demonstrates the great power of Our Lady and demonstrates her fidelity in fulfilling her promises. The bishops of Portugal, as I said, consecrated their nation to the Immaculate Heart on May 13, 1931. And the effects wrought from this consecration were so spectacular that Frere Michel of the Holy Trinity, author of this book, I'll tell you about it in a minute, calls Portugal at this time the showcase of Our Lady. It seems that Our Lady used Portugal at this time to show on a national level what she will do worldwide when the Pope, in union with the world's bishops, consecrates Russia to the Immaculate Heart. Thanks to this 1931 consecration, Portugal experienced a threefold miracle. First, there was a magnificent Catholic Renaissance, a great rebirth of Catholic life. Second, there was a miracle of political and social reform. And third, there was the miracle of peace, in that Russia was preserved from the communist terror, especially from the Spanish Civil War that was raging right next door. And also, Portugal was preserved from the devastations of the Second World War. Cardinal Catejeda, the Patriarch of Lisbon, on May 13, 1942, did not hesitate to publicly attribute to Our Lady of Fatima the great graces that she had obtained for Portugal at this time. Here's what he said, quote, "To express what has been going on here for 25 years, the Portuguese vocabulary has but one word, miracle. Yes, we are convinced that we owe the wonderful transformation of Portugal to the protection of the Most Holy Virgin." So we'll talk about this 1931 consecration, and then we'll talk about the great graces that this consecration procured. Now, it was on October 13th, 1930, that the Catholic Church gave its solemn canonical approval to the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima and to the message. So naturally, this aroused a great enthusiasm throughout Portugal. And it was at this time that the bishops of Portugal gathered around Cardinal Catejeda and decided to give public testimony to Our Lady of Fatima. And they decided that on May 13th, 1931, a great national pilgrimage of thanksgiving would be organized under the direction of all the bishops of the country. And on that day, the bishops would solemnly consecrate Portugal to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart. Now, the bishops had actually made this decision to consecrate Portugal in January of 1931. They did this when they were together on a retreat, and the retreat, incidentally, was preached by Father Matteo Crowley, who was the great apostle of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And it's also been said that Sister Lucy herself, she was the one that inspired the whole idea of this consecration. Now, in 1928, a few years previously, on the Feast of Christ the King, the Portuguese bishops had consecrated Portugal to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So these bishops quite rightly saw the consecration to the Immaculate Heart as just a continuation, a natural follow-through, a logical follow-through to this first act. So on May 13th, 1931, 300,000 of the faithful came to Portugal, came to Fatima rather, for the event. And if I may, I would just like to read you the consecration formula of these good bishops. It is a tribute to the faith of the episcopacy of the Portugal at this time. It shows their great faith and great love of Our Lady, and how much Fatima and Our Lady was central in their lives. Fatima wasn't incidental, it was central. Here it goes. "The shepherds chosen by your Son to watch over and feed in his name the sheep he has acquired at the price of his blood, in this land of Holy Mary, whose name cannot be pronounced without pronouncing your own, come today as the officials and consecrated representatives of their flock, and in an act of filial homage of faith, love, and trust, to solemnly consecrate the Portuguese nation to your Immaculate Heart. Take it from our fragile hands into your own. Defend it and guard it as your own property. Make Jesus reign, conquer, and rule in it. Outside of him, there is no salvation. Then the bishops speak of the imminent danger of the contamination of communists. They said, "We, the pontiffs of your people, feel a terrible storm raging around us, threatening to disperse and destroy the faithful flock of those who bless you, because you are the mother of Jesus. Afflicted, we stretch out our suppliant hands towards your Son as we cry out, 'Save us, O Lord, for we perish.' Intercede for Portugal, O Our Lady, in this grave hour, when from the east blows furious winds, bringing cries of death against your Son, and against the civilization founded on his teachings, deceiving minds, perverting hearts, and lighting the fires of hatred and revolution in the world. Help of Christians, save us." So you can see that's dead aimed at communism. And I also find it edifying that not so long ago, these bishops were concerned with the preservation of Christendom. They spoke of an evil that, quote, "brings cries of death against your Son and against the civilization founded on his teachings." They're still committed to Christendom. God bless them. Then the bishops turned their attention to the growing breakdown of morality in society. Quote, "Intercede for Portugal, Our Lady, in this troubled hour when the unclean waves of an open immorality which has lost the notion of sin exalt the rehabilitation of the flesh in the face of the very cross of your Son, threatening to choke in this world the lily of virtue nourished by the Eucharistic blood of Jesus. Virgin most powerful, pray for us. Intercede for Portugal, Our Lady, in this hour of passions and doubts when even the good run the risk of being lost. Unite all the Portuguese people around your Son and for the love of the Church, and also in the cultivation of virtue and respect for orders and fraternal charity. Queen of Peace, pray for us." Last paragraph. "Remember finally, patroness of our country, that Portugal once taught so many lands to proclaim you blessed among all women. In remembrance of what it once did for your glory, Our Lady of Fatima, save it by giving it Jesus, to whom it will find truth, life, and peace." It's the close of the prayer. It's a beautiful prayer, full of faith. And Our Lady, in response to those bishops fulfilling her request so exactly, Our Lady of Fatima accomplished what is called the threefold miracle that I had mentioned previously. First, there was a magnificent Catholic Renaissance, a rebirth of Catholic life. Second, there was a miracle of political and social reform. And third, the miracle of peace, and that Russia was preserved from the communist terror, and I meant to say Portugal. Portugal was preserved from the communist terror, and Portugal was preserved from the devastations of the Second World War. And for the bulk of this information, I'm relying on Volume 2 of the magnificent trilogy, The Whole Truth About Fatima. This book gives a lot of detail about this triple miracle. I'm just going to give you a brief outline so you can get a general idea of what happened. These books are free at the table over there. So, first, the miracle of conversion. Now, the first of this triple miracle of conversion, a magnificent Catholic Renaissance. And this Catholic rebirth was so striking, so dramatic, that even the people who lived through it at the time attributed it unquestionably as the work of God. At this time, there was a dramatic increase of priestly and religious vocations. For example, in one diocese, there were only 18 seminarians. It was in the Diocese of Porto Alegre. 1917, 18 seminarians. By 1933, there were 201. And diocese after diocese after diocese throughout Portugal tells the same story. The number of priests in Portugal increased at least 25%. That was up until 1964, and then, of course, in the 60s, the council, everything started to collapse again, as it did throughout the world. As for religious, their numbers almost quadrupled in 10 years. The same ascending curve was also noticed in the number of religious communities at the same time. And lastly, there was the great renewal of Christian life, which showed itself in many ways, including the development of the Catholic press, Catholic radio, pilgrimages, spiritual retreats, and a magnificent movement of Catholic action that was firmly integrated into diocesan and parish life. There was at this time an association called the Pious Union of the Crusaders of Fatima. It numbered about 500,000 members. And the people themselves, the lay people themselves, were fiercely anti-communists, and they were devoted to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This Catholic Renaissance, now this is just not my observation, this Catholic Renaissance was so great that in 1942, the bishops of Portugal declared in a collective pastoral letter, this is how the national episcopacy spoke at the time: anyone who would have closed their eyes 25 years ago and opened them now would no longer recognize Portugal. So vast is the transformation worked by the modest and invisible factor of the apparition of the Blessed Virgin at Fatima. Really, Our Lady wishes to save Portugal. So, close quote. So that was the first effect of Our Lady of Fatima and the national consecration, a magnificent Catholic rebirth in the nation. Second, there was the miracle of political and social reform. Okay, that was the second. Now, we have to remember that the bishops had consecrated Portugal to Our Lady so that she may save it from communism, which was taking root in Spain right next door. And around 1932, an uncompromising Catholic leader named Antonio Salazar came to be premier of Portugal. Salazar, of course, had been rising in government since 1928, and Salazar's goal was to put into practice a Catholic program that was counter-revolutionary. Counter-revolutionary. In fact, Salazar himself received a special blessing from Pope Pius XII for this work. Here's what Pius XII said: "I bless him with all my heart, and I cherish the most ardent desire that he may be able to complete successfully his work of national restoration, both spiritual and morals." So, as I said, Salazar's program was a Catholic counter-revolutionary program. That's why he's hated so much. He called communism the greatest heresy of our time, and he strove with all his might to fight against it. He was a fierce opponent of socialism, liberalism, and to use his words, he was opposed to, quote, everything which diminishes, divides, and dissolves the family. Here's what Salazar said: "For me, I have only one goal. What I plan is to make Portugal live normally." He must have been reading Chesterton. Catholicism is sanity. He's saying, I want Portugal to live normally. We want to preserve at any price from the tidal wave that is inundating the world simplicity of life. We want to preserve purity of morals, gentleness of sentiments, the equilibrium of social relations, the modest but noble family atmosphere which is proper to Portuguese life. It's very noble sentiments here. They're more than sentiments, okay? Very simply, his goal was to establish a Catholic social order wherein states and governments and social institutions would base their laws of right and wrong on what the gospel teaches is right and wrong and on what the church teaches is right and wrong. That's why he said, I only want Portugal to live normally. And in the process, there's evidence that Salazar dissolved Freemasonry in 1935. Now, Salazar was keen to leave the Catholic Church complete and entire liberty of action. It permitted the Catholic religion to be taught in all schools, not just Catholic schools. And of course, any Catholic parent, any non-Catholic parent going to a non-Catholic school with a child going to, if they didn't want, they would pull the child out of the Catholic religion class because, as you know, the Catholic religion is not forced on anyone. He didn't force the religion on the young people. But anyway, you get the idea. So, throughout Portugal, the Catholic education of youth was greatly favored. Another remarkable development this time was Salazar, this is fascinating, Salazar's legislation on marriage. Here's what it read. The Portuguese state recognizes the civil effects of marriage celebrated according to canonical laws. Article 24 reads, in harmony, this is a quote, in harmony with the essential properties of Catholic marriage, it is understood by the very fact of the celebration of a canonical marriage the spouses renounced the legal right to ask for a divorce, close quote. So this was a law of the state that said if Catholics engage in a valid sacramental marriage, they can't even think of asking for a divorce. And the effect of this law was that the number of Catholic marriages did not go down, they went up. So that by 1960, nearly 91% of all marriages in the country, 91% were canonical Catholic sacramental marriages. Now, can you imagine, just imagine, living in a country where 91% of all marriages are proper sacramental marriages, and the couples going into that marriage completely accept the fact that divorce is out of the question. That is a civilization of love. And it is nowhere to be found as we enter into the third millennium. So while many other countries throughout the world were plagued with communism and humanism and socialism and revolution, Salazar stood practically alone in establishing a nation that was, for the most part, based on Catholic social principles. In other words, with objective truth, with reality. Third miracle. There was the miracle of peace, in that Portugal was preserved from the communist terror, and Portugal was preserved from the horrors of the Second World War. Now, it was well known at this time that Moscow's plan was to plant communism in Spain, because if they did that, then Europe would be bookended by communism. There'd be Russia on the one side and communist Spain on the other. So the Portuguese bishops, and of course then the communists could kind of just close in on the right side. I mean, you can see the tactic very clearly. Now, the Portuguese bishops were watching this very closely. They were, keeping abreast of what was going on in Spain, and they were afraid for Portugal. So, did they establish dialogue? No. In 1936, the bishops met together and made a secret vow. They vowed that the bishops would lead a national pilgrimage to Fatima in 1938, quote, to give solemn thanks to the Blessed Mother if she obtained for Portugal victory over communism and the benefit of peace. This is Cardinal Ketejeda's own words. I mean, the faith of these men is incredibly edifying. On July 13th, 1936, just 2 months after their vow, there was the assassination of the monarchist deputy Calvo Sotelo, which marked the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. And as Frere Michel points out in this book here that I just mentioned, the threat to Portugal was very grave. I mean, humanly speaking, it was inevitable that the revolution would just sweep into Portugal. But it never did, and it could have, and it almost did. For instance, on September 8th, 1936, 2 Portuguese ships mutinied to join the communists in Spain. And as soon as Salazar heard this, he gave the order that the ships be bombarded until they either surrendered or sank. That's how Salazar dealt with it. Now, when Salazar did this, he received the full throttle support of the bishops of Portugal. So it wasn't long before the mutineers came to their senses, and afterwards, the bishops themselves, they didn't write a pastoral letter about peace after this. They said no. A revolutionary movement got underway, which was quickly snuffed out. The Portuguese could continue in tranquility on the path of work and progress. So one major danger was averted, and almost a year later, there was an attempt on Salazar's life. July 4th, 1937, Salazar was on his way to Mass at a private chapel, and just as he stepped out of the car, a bomb exploded only about 10 feet away. The bomb was hidden in an iron case. But the bomb blast left Salazar untouched and left his chauffeur untouched, even though the poor chauffeur was rendered deaf due to the explosion. And rather than being all shaken up, Salazar just looked around, and then he just said to his friends, "Let's go to Mass." He just picked up where he left off. Now, had Salazar been assassinated, it would have thrown the country into incredible turmoil, which, as you know, is fertile breeding ground for communism. And the bishops acknowledged, again, in a collective letter, 1938, that it was an act of God that preserved Salazar's life in this attempted assassination. So anyway, by 1938, General Franco in Spain was on his way to victory, and the danger for Portugal had finally been averted. So on May 13th, 1938, when the bishops fulfilled their vow, the bishops of Portugal, they renewed the national consecration of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And Cardinal Catejeda acknowledged publicly that Our Lady of Fatima had spared Portugal the scourge of communism. Here's what he said. Since Our Lady of Fatima appeared in 1917, a special blessing of God has descended on the land of Portugal. Especially if we review the 2 years which have gone by since our vow, we cannot fail to recognize that the invisible hand of God has protected Portugal, sparing it the scourge of war and the leprosy of atheistic communism. And even Pope Pius XII was amazed that Portugal had been spared from communism. In an address to the Portuguese people, the Pope spoke about, this is a quote, the red peril, so menacing and so close to you, and yet avoided in such an unexpected manner, close quote. Now, for Portugal at this time, one danger had passed, but then there was another staring them right in the face. They had escaped the contagion of communism from Spain, but now the Second World War was about to break out. And on February 6, 1939, 7 months before the declaration of war, Sister Lucy wrote to Monsignor de Silva, I think he was the Bishop of Fatima, and she told him the war was imminent, but she told him of a magnificent and miraculous promise. Here's what she said, quote, in this horrible war, Portugal would be spared because of the national consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary made by the bishops. And Portugal was spared the horrors of war. The details are too numerous to go into right now. It's all in here. I recommend volume 2 of The Whole Truth About Fatima. And on December 2nd, 1940, Sister Lucy wrote Pope Pius XII and told him that Portugal is receiving the special protection during the war that other nations would have received if the bishops would have consecrated their nation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Here's what she wrote. Most Holy Father, our Lord promises a special protection to our country in this war due to the consecration of the nation by the Portuguese prelates to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, as proof of the graces that would have been granted to other nations had they also consecrated themselves to her. So this is why Friar Michel of the Trinity calls Portugal at this time the showcase of Our Lady. There was the magnificent Catholic Renaissance, there was the miracle of political and social reform, and the miracle of peace. And that Russia was spared the contagion of communism and the devastation of the Second World War. This threefold miracle that Our Lady accomplished on a national scale in Portugal is something that she wants to do worldwide in an even more magnificent manner. But it won't happen until the Pope, in union with all the bishops of the world, consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This triple miracle also of Portugal stands as a preview of how Russia and the world will look after the proper consecration of Russia. It is a gauge. This is one of the reasons why I find it helpful. This is a gauge. We look at Russia and we say, does it look anything like Portugal? Because as we said, Cardinal Catejeda said, Our Lady has shown Portugal to show what she will do for the whole world. So we have this model to look at and to gauge, to see, we look at Russia and see how it measures up. We'll take a look at them one by one. We'll compare the 3 points from Portugal with Russia today. And also, we're not singling out Russia as being the only evil nation in the world, but we're concentrating on Russia because this is what Our Lady, this was Our Lady's focus. So, after the 1931 consecration, as I said, there was a great Catholic Renaissance in Portugal. But since the 1984 consecration of Russia, consecration of the world, rather, Russia boasts no rebirth of Catholic life. The Catholic Church, you heard some of the facts yesterday from Chris Ferrara, the Catholic Church is still a minority religion in Russia. The largest religion in Russia is the schismatic Russian Orthodox. Next after that is Islam, followed by a whole assortment of Protestant sects. The Catholic religion in Russia only has the status of a sect among sects. That is, it is on the level with kooky minority religions such as the Moonies, the Mormons, the Quakers, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Hare Krishnas, and the Church of Scientology. And I should mention here, too, a fact that should be obvious, that the conversion of Russia that Our Lady spoke about means converting to the Catholic faith. Now, this is not only a point of common sense, but it's also found in the testimony of Father Joachim Alonso, probably the top Fatima expert of the 20th century. Father Alonso, who had many interviews with Sister Lucy and knew her mind, this is what Father Alonso wrote in 1976, quote, "We should affirm that Lucia has always thought that the conversion of Russia is not to be limited to the return of the Russian people to the Orthodox Christian religions, rejecting Marxist atheism of the Soviets, but rather it refers purely, plainly, and simply to the total, integral conversion of Russia to the one true Church of Jesus Christ, the Catholic Church." We look at it today, just a month ago, September 3rd, 2006, just a month ago. United Press International said that there are now over 5,000 sects in Russia that involve up to 10 million people in that nation. Father Yevgeny Tremeskin, deputy head of the Rehabilitation Center for Victims of Non-Traditional Religions and Occult and Sorcery Cults, says that his center has been, this is a quote from him, continually approached by relatives of those who died in cult rites and whose property has been taken away by the sectarians. Father Yevgeny said, quote, "Different sects target different sections of populations. Some aim at civil servants, while others aim at workers. Thus, Scientologists and Jehovah's Witnesses have gained confidence of administrative and military circles and educational community. Oriental and Hindu philosophies has spread to the intellectual elite, but targets mostly the youth." Now, we can see, this is no conversion of Russia, especially when we contrast it, the state of Russia, with the magnificent rebirth of Catholic life in Portugal in the 1930s and 40s that was the result of the bishop's consecration. Point number 2, following the 1931 consecration, there was in Portugal the miracle of political and social reform in accordance with Catholic social principles. But after the 1984 consecration, there is no Catholic social reform anywhere in Russia. To the contrary, Russia now boils with immorality and decadence. Over 22 years, it is now over 22 years after the consecration of the world, Russia has the highest abortion rate in the world. Father Daniel Marrow, who recently spent 8 years in Russia, says that statistically, the average Russian woman will have 8 abortions in her childbearing years. Father Marrow believes it's actually the real average is about 12 abortions per woman. The reason for these dreadful figures is that other contraceptive methods, which are immoral anyway, of course, have not been introduced in Russia, and nor are they trusted, so this leaves abortion as, quote unquote, the cheapest way to limit the family size. Presently in Russia, abortions are free, but a live birth is not free. Contrast, in post-1931 Portugal, a Catholic head of state virtually outlawed divorce. But in post-1984 Russia, the divorce rate matches that of the United States, which means it is an extremely high divorce rate. Russia also has the highest alcohol consumption in the world. Satanism is on the rise in Russia, and the birth rate, as Chris told us yesterday, is plummeting. And homosexuality is rampant in Russia, rampant. In fact, April 1993, 9 years after the 1984 consecration of the world, Russian President Boris Yeltsin allowed homosexuality to be decriminalized. Homosexuality is legal in Russia. Worse, Russia is now a leading world center in the distribution of child pornography. And again, this is all from the secular press. The Associated Press reported on August 9, 2001, of a Moscow-based child pornography ring linked to another child pornography ring in Texas. This is the Associated Press report. I'm going to quote. "Russian law does not distinguish between child pornography and pornography involving adults and treats the production and distribution of either as a minor crime, said Dmitry Cherkovkov, head of the Russian Interior Ministry's Department for High Technology Crimes. Russian police often complain about the legal chaos that has turned Russia into an international center of child pornography production. Unfortunately, these Russian names are a little hard for me, Cherkovkov told reporters, unfortunately, Russia has turned into a world trash bin of child pornography. This is the secular press. Then there is this disturbing news of Russia's recent highly immoral reality television program, and Russians are tuning into it by the millions. Millions of Russians were tuning into Russia's new and lewd reality TV program, Za Steklom, which means behind the glass. Of this program, which aired three times a day, one news service said, Russia has made a pointed effect to make the show more risque than their Western counterparts. And here's what, and I apologize for what I'm going to explain here. 6 young contestants in their early 20s, 3 male, 3 female, of course none of them are married or anything like that. They're locked up in an apartment where 60 cameras film them 24 hours a day. All of their activities are filmed and broadcast, including the showers, everything, and worse. It is an X-rated reality TV show with young couples engaging in highly immoral acts in front of the cameras, broadcast nationally. Mark Franchetti, he's a reporter for the London Times who covers Russia. He wrote on November 24, 2001, that despite grumbles of disapproval from old hardline communists, the communists, Russian viewers, quote, cannot get enough of this raunchiest version of reality television. Franchetti writes that the program, quote, boasts an audience share of more than 50%, and thousands of Russians have endured sub-zero temperatures and queued for more than an hour to catch a glimpse of it through a window of the flat. Millions have logged on to the website, which has crashed frequently under the weight of the traffic. Now, the next example is so gruesome that I really shudder to discuss it. But we have to, if we want to look at, Pope Leo XIII said we have to look at the world as it really is. In early April 2005, just last year, border guards stopped the train entering Russia from the Ukraine and confiscated a mule carrying 25 frozen human fetuses in 2 vacuum flasks. The mule's owner claimed that he had bought the fetuses from a medical research center, but he wasn't telling the truth. This gruesome cargo, in fact, were aborted babies from girls and young women that were being exported from the Ukraine for use in illegal beauty treatments, costing thousands of dollars. April 17 London Observer reported that racketeers are paying women to sell their aborted fetuses to quack clinics for nearly £10,000 for courses of anti-aging injections that claim to rejuvenate skin and to cure a whole raft of diseases. Here's what the London Observer said. Again, secular source. It is thought that women in the former Soviet Republic are being paid £100 at a time to persuade them to have abortions, to allow their fetuses to be used in treatments. Most of the fetuses are sold in Russia for up to £5,000 each. Some are paid extra to have abortions later in their pregnancy. They're paid extra. Well, if you wait a little longer, we'll give you more money. The fetuses are cryogenically frozen and passed on to beauty salons. And the Observer reports beauty salons in Moscow that buy the aborted material to provide fetal therapy are flourishing right in Moscow, despite a Russian ban on all commercial treatments using human cells other than bone marrow. So the law exists, but no one pays attention to it. The salons, the report says, offer injections of stem cells, the undivided cells present in embryos that can adapt into any kind of tissue, although they are still at a trial stage worldwide. And even though abortions are performed more than 12 weeks into the pregnancy, they are restricted in the Ukraine, these later abortions are encouraged because the alleged curative powers from the older aborted fetuses are thought to be thought to be greater. The process, of course, involves corrupt doctors, incredibly corrupt. Here's what a Kiev policeman says. When a doctor wants a fetus to sell, he tells a girl that there is a medical reason for having an abortion later than 12 weeks. So he says, well, you can't have it, you have to wait longer. And he lies to her, saying, well, so that he can procure this. The woman will be paid to wait until a late stage in her pregnancy or might never know she was duped, said the policeman. Her aborted baby would be passed to a middleman or an institution which, and I apologize what I'm going to read here, the observer says, would be cut into separate organs before placing these in storage. The body parts are then sold and taken abroad. This is going on right now. Though injecting using human fetal cells are banned in Ukraine and Russia, they are nonetheless widely available in salons that charge up to £10,000. Wealthy clients are told that treatments can stop the aging process or eliminate such debilitating conditions as Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's. The observer says one fashionable Moscow clinic promises to take 10 years off your face. Professor Vladimir Smirnov, director of Moscow's Institute of Experimental Cardiology, said, "We are talking about a huge, corrupt, and dangerous trade in quack therapies, and Russian law enforcement against this ongoing outrage is notoriously lax." Now, would anyone in their right mind call this the conversion of Russia? Would St. Padre Pio or St. Maximilian Kolbe or St. Teresa of Lisieux call this the triumph of the Immaculate Heart? To call what I have just described the triumph of the Immaculate Heart is blasphemy. I mean, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but we almost need a sixth First Saturday to repair to the blasphemies of people who attribute this to the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. And the third and final point, as a result of the 1931 consecration, Portugal was spared a miracle, was granted a miracle of peace. It was spared the horrors of the Spanish Civil War and World War II. But by contrast, the 1984 consecration, after this, the 1984 consecration of the world, there is no peace. The promise of peace to follow the proper consecration of Russia, and is not going to be for Russia alone, but for the whole world. Our Lady of Fatima said, a period of peace will be granted to the whole world. And there is no need to propound at length on this dearth of peace, especially from the American standpoint in light of the September 11th attack, what they call the worst terrorist attack in history. I mean, if it happens to the United States, it's just the worst. I mean, that's how the Americans think. Terrorism can go on everywhere, but if it happens to us, it's the worst. This will not be one of the defining moments of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. The constant war in the Middle East is proof enough. President George Bush says, well, we're going to be at war indefinitely. Well, thank you. We are in no period of peace because the consecration has not been accomplished. But even though it's not been accomplished, it doesn't mean that in the meantime we can do nothing. We just sit around and wait. We can still make consecrations to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart. The graces are there for the taking. Now, I'm a layman, and I certainly cannot tell priests and bishops what to do. But I can tell you what I would love to see happen. I would love to see bishops, every bishop, consecrate his diocese to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I would love to see bishops of every nation gather together and consecrate their nation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I would love to see priests consecrate their own parishes to the Immaculate Heart. And I would love to see priests and bishops enthusiastically promote the message of Fatima and make this message central to their lives, as clearly the bishops of Portugal did. Fatima, devotion to the Immaculate Heart, was not off to the side like devotion to St. Rita. It was central to their lives. I would love to see husbands and fathers consecrate their families, their homes, and each one of their children individually to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, that perhaps she may preserve and protect them the way she did the nation of Portugal. I would love to see individuals themselves consecrate themselves to the Immaculate Heart of Mary and to live this consecration by obeying Our Lady of Fatima's requests, daily rosary, 5 First Saturdays, making sacrifices for sinners, offering our daily duty to God as an act of sacrifice. And finally, and most importantly, I would love to see and I pray every day that I see, and that my children see it, that the Pope, in union with the world's bishops, consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, so that we may see her triumph, which will be the peace of Christ in the kingdom of Christ. Thank you for your attention.